Neologic Studios, and you are watching episode 4 of Into the Gauntlet. Today we're covering Mark Wood's Double. So for those of you who have probably not seen the last episodes, I dive in and I show you the mastering process for mixes that were submitted to us via a challenge that we did during the month of September. I went head-to-head against another mastering engineer, Christian Casito, Envious Audio, and together we mastered the same songs that were submitted to us, and we sent them back to the artists, only the artists didn't get to know which engineer did which. They get to keep both masters free and clear, do whatever they want with it. But the goal is to provide them the best sounding master possible, and they just let us know which one they like best. Today's master is of Mark Woods submitting the song Devil, which is a pretty heavy-hitting dubstep track. This is definitely meant to be a club banger. So without further ado, let's dive into it. I'm going to show you the walkthrough of my mastering approach. Only today, over the last episodes, I'm going to focus on a few different things. I'm going to talk from a different perspective while you're seeing the time lapse. So let's dive in. As usual, I set up my session ingest settings. I'm bringing the song. I start taking a listen to it. And this is where you're going to see a typical process. As a mastering engineer, I like to pay attention to the song's structure because there might be things that I want to do to emphasize certain points of the mix, and it helps to know the tempo of the song. It helps to know what major song structure parts there are, and it helps me to just identify what those with markers. Now the other thing I do is I look for references that are roughly in the same vein or genre that I'm familiar with, and then I start about going into and bring in my template, and you notice my mix chains, I'm auditioning multiple ones. But from the perspective of what am I listening for, I'd like to dive into that a little bit further. So how the mix responds to my chain in terms of what you're seeing here, that's where the bulk of my time spent adjusting and gain staging the mastering chain. I'm going through plugin by plugin throughout each process and trying to just listen to how it responds first. And then I'll start adjusting things that I hear to either try and see if I can correct what the vector is out of the previous processor into the next processor. But the other thing is I'm just listening to what's happening to the song. Is it structured in such a way that this chain is actually going to get me that result that they're after, or that I think they're after? So you can tell I'm on my first break. I usually try to take a couple of breaks, one to reset my ears, but also to allow myself some time to reflect on what I've been doing and then dive into the next spot. So you can tell already I've got 2 mix chains set up and I'm working on a third, and I'm already doing some automation. So another thing that I'm listening for is stereo width, and I'm also listening throughout this entire process to things like overall energy. Where is the energy balance of the song? Is it meant to have a lot of low end? Is it there in the mix? Is it supposed to be there in the master? Maybe they want that there. Those are questions that I'm asking myself while I'm diving in. And then you'll start to see that I'm actually playing with some automation into the dynamics chain just a little bit to help drive certain sections of the song. I want to emphasize the perception of dynamics. That's another critical thing, because when you're trying to drive loud masters, it's about the perception. Because if we look at the waveform, that bricked, the squarification effect, basically, you're trying to make it as loud as possible for as long as possible because you're up against the ceiling. It doesn't get any louder than 0. So that perception, if you want to try to create that perception of punch and impact, there has to be clever things that are being done in the mix to drive the master chain to do that thing. And there's also paying attention to energy distribution, or as I like to call it, harmonic structure, meaning from the beginning or the lowest frequency notes all the way to the highest frequency ranges. What are you doing to structure your mix so that it does something pleasing in the mastering stage? And that's the thing that I really want you guys to take away from this whole process. If you're trying to do electronic dance music or any type of heavy bass or heavy electronic music, it's all about loudness, and the mix is not going to sound polished and then you send it to mastering. The mix has to be designed to go to mastering to sound polished and loud that way. So that's the biggest takeaway. So let's dive in and we'll compare the masters now. First, let me just show you guys. The top master is mine and the bottom master is Christian. So the one in blue, Master B, it says Christian there. You can tell they're actually pretty close in terms of just how sausaged they are. They're not terribly sausaged, and that's just due to the way that the mix is structured. He actually designed it to be pretty dynamic. And so if you listen, I'm going to play a couple of different parts and I'll show you what's happening. So right away, you can tell there is an audible difference between mine and his. Now, we're much closer this time than in previous tracks, and I think this is because, at least for me, I was definitely starting to get more into the groove of things. I was paying more attention to the mix, whereas the first few, I was definitely getting in my head because Christian had 2 wins under his belt. And by the third one, with Sean Rose's master, I finally had 1 win, and I was starting to get some groove back, and I was starting to just be more self-aware of like, hey, I'm the master engineer, this is my job, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be serving the artist, not trying to just enhance everything. And let's face it, as artists, we do get sucked into shiny syndrome.
Ooh, shiny.
What I would like to show you guys is I want to dive into a couple of key parts and let's really dissect what's happening between my chain and his. And I can only infer on what his chain is doing versus mine, but you can definitely hear some subtle differences. For one, he definitely seemed to retain more of the top end, whereas my loudness level, I was EQing and contouring some of that high end out to help balance out the mix so that it's not too harsh when it comes to loud playback on club systems or wherever you might want to be playing it. And this is an approach that I'm very critical of. I try to pay attention to, as we're raising loudness, are we being mindful of the contour effect or the equal loudness contour? So some people have probably heard this called the Fletcher-Munson curve, but what this is doing is it's just describing the process, the analytical process for what happens to our hearing at various sound pressure levels or overall loudness. And there's different ratings for this, but this is why you tend to see mixing and mastering engineers always referencing at low volumes. They're not going to play a mix super loud in the studio. They're going to mix quieter. It should be quiet enough that you can have somebody in the room carrying a normal conversation at a casual volume level intelligibly and be able to hear everything they're saying.
Will you two shut up?
That's insane, right? You want to be able to hear the music. Well, that's the thing. When you're mixing, it's about balancing relative levels. It's not about trying to make everything loud. If you want it loud, turn it up louder.
Shut up!
But there's also a critical perceptual issue that goes on there. When you're pushing things too loud, your ears don't perceive things the same way. So you might be fooling yourself into thinking that you have a balanced mix that sounds great loud, but when you turn it down, doesn't work. And this is why people will reference the car stereo test, or they'll reference the home theater test, or you're testing in different things, because what you're hearing is those imperfections that your studio environment or that volume level as well might have been masking. So let's dive back into one critical spot, and that is the drop, because there are some things happening that I'm listening to that I feel definitely made it a little tougher for the mastering to reach a certain loudness level. Now, we still hit a pretty decent loudness number. In fact, let me double check. For my master, I was actually hitting negative 12.5. Now, your target reference, if you're specifically trying to target Spotify and just do nothing else, Spotify's at negative 14, but they're not integrated. They're not integrated loudness, meaning that they're not looking at the overall volume from beginning to end of the song and finding this average or integrated level. And so they're going to go by the loudest 5%. So if you see here, this whole section of the song, if you have, that's greater than 5%. So they're going to go off the loudest 5% and then turn it down by there. So we're actually hitting somewhere around 9.7. And, well, that's the thing, is if we were hitting a true peak max of 1.3, you have to also keep that in mind because they're going to turn it down to -2 true peak before they transcode. And what transcoding is basically the encoding process to their lossy streaming format in OGG. And the reason they do that is just for a pure safety net. They don't want to have to go through, and that's like the bare minimum for their lowest quality streaming rates, which is something like 96 kilobits per second. So if somebody's way out there on a service network at like cellular, edge, and they're not even getting 3G network, the reception's just really crappy, they might be able to still get a stream pumped through, but it's only going to be at like 96K. And at that point, it just sounds so bad. But this is what they're trying to compensate for. They want it to still sound intelligible for the encoding that's going to go to that lowest stream. So with Christians, he's actually still a little lower even. He's at -13.9, whereas his, I believe his max was about 8.1. So overall, I think I pushed it just a little further than he did. But what exactly are we listening to, or what are we listening for? So let's dive in. Let me just bring these up again. So let's pay attention to just the transients. I want you to listen for the transient in the kick and the snare. Now, we're both pretty close, but there are some subtle differences, and that has to do, if we just look at his waveform versus mine, my peak, there's this vector information that's happening, and it's really hard to tell until you really can start to train your ears to see it. Train your ears to correlate with what you're seeing on screen. And that is, in some cases, we're seeing DC offset, but I'm not sure if that's just in the mix, because it's apparent on both of ours, which means either Christian is also doing multiband processing, or there's an issue that's presenting itself in the mix. So let's actually check the mix. So what is it that I'm referring to? When you look at the peaks, right? There's a positive, but if you had a true sine wave, you would know that there is an equal negative excursion. So this is the positive excursion up here. If you look at my master here, and there's the negative excursion. However, it doesn't seem to be as prevalent in the mix. So what exactly is going on? If you do any type of DC offset, this can usually correct it. But what it might actually be is phasing due to the kick and the sub playing together, and they're not quite in tune. Or they might be in tune, but they're out of phase, meaning the particular portion of the sub, even though it's the exact same frequency, the root note, its start time is delayed in such a way that it's causing phasing. And you can start to see that as we move across these kicks. So sometimes it doesn't have an equal positive peak and a negative peak. Sometimes it does down here. And sometimes it doesn't even reach full peak. So that means that anytime there could be volume issues that become apparent when you're trying to push a certain loudness, and it's not even the mastering's fault, it's actually going back to the mix. So that's one particular mix tip. If anybody has heard of Bathymetrics, go check out his YouTube channel. He has a great sub and kick masterclass for phase alignment and how to address those issues, how to see them, how to hear them, and how to overcome them. And it's a very long video, but I promise you it's worth it if you want your production levels to go up to the next stage. Because this is exactly what I'm talking about. I'm hearing it and I'm seeing it in this file here. So there's another mix tip that I want to bring up, and that is towards the end. So he's got a second drop that has a really cool snare roll, but I think this is just a mix balance issue where it can just be turned down a little bit. So let me play that part for you guys, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So I feel like in the mastering stage, if we're trying to push that loudness, he probably could have just brought it down a little bit, You still have the transients, but the issue when you have a transient up in the higher range like that is it was starting to mask the kick, because either the kick is just a little too weak, or there's already so much information going on in the mid-range where the snare is sitting, that when the transients are clipping up there, it's actually taking up more perceptual headroom, meaning that's what we're just focusing on more. It tends to take precedent over the other things. You have to pay attention to transient information and also the power level, just listening for overall how much energy is coming across from each individual instrument, and either balance it in a way that you are intending for that thing to be the focus, or it's supporting all of the other instruments, or your vocal or whatever you want to support. Pick your lead and make everything else the support. Alright, so by now you can definitely tell I was starting to get back on my game, but there's still some things that I feel like I could have learned to do a little bit better. I gave myself too many choices. I still ended up doing 3 chains and auditioning between those 3. Now that I had some experimentation under my belt, I was still able to walk away with a much stronger master and a little bit faster in terms of building these chains out and auditioning them, gain structuring everything. I didn't take quite nearly as long, because in the last episode with Sean's master, I built an entire experimental chain from scratch, which just wasted so much time. But I felt like I needed it. It's a learning experience, and I'm willing to take that time to learn, be willing to fail. Let's see, because I'm still using this chain. This is the one that I ended up submitting, was the chain A. You can tell it's pretty much the same, except now I'm already doing a lot of cutting in the sides, just the very first thing. So I'm gonna mute that real quick, and it might not seem like much, but I started to get some phase coherency back into play down in the low end, just because of the way that the mix was being bussed out. It could have been just a little bit more control on the mix end, but I feel like that helped gain some clarity for transients to punch through. All right, so I thought I'd just let you hear a little bit of quick A/B in between those things. That obviously they're not super gain staged in such a way that the mix is equally balanced in input and output. Typically, if I had the time to do that, I would definitely have gone in and fixed that issue, so that way I can easily A/B between with that item off and with that item on without hearing a volume change, which is what we heard on a few of those. As a master engineer, you definitely want to have that staging set up so that way you can quickly A/B with that item in and out, so that way you can hear the effect of what it's doing. And that takes a little bit of work because you have to gain stage your input and output, so that way you're auditioning through the effect of what you're doing. Anytime you make changes, you have to rebalance those ins and outs, and that's just the nature of the game. I definitely learned a lot just because, let's face it, 4 masters in and we only have 2 hours to get everything done. There is a lot going on behind the scenes mentally and in my in the mental game. And it's been a super fun journey so far, but I was still experimenting with 2 other chains the entire time. So my question for you guys is, if you had to make one decision that would better the quality of your mix, what would you do? Is it going to be that I'm going to start mixing into a limiter to hear the effect of how I'm driving it? Is your goal to get to a loud master, or do you want to retain some sense of dynamics? Is that going to be your focus? Go in with an intent and ask yourself one question when you go to produce your next song and see if that does anything to up your game. So really quick, let me just show you guys the different chains that I have built, and we'll listen to an audition between the two, so that way you get a sense of where I was in my head. That's quite a dramatic difference between those 3. And you could definitely feel on Master Chain C, there was a lot of room left for improvement just because it felt like the bass went bye-bye. On Master Chain 2, I actually feel like I kind of like it better. There was a little bit more prominent low end in there, and that's due to the particular concrete limiter here. In this bass bump that it does, it actually boosts a low end from roughly 80 hertz on down. There's just this nice, pleasant low end bump. And so let's go back to those. So, pretty interesting, right?
No way.
Hopefully you guys caught some things here today, and for me, I definitely learned a lot, because there is a particular thing that goes on with a mix like this that can make it really hard to push as far as -5 LUFS.
Not a chance.
If we're trying to hit that loud, we are absolutely trying to go for distortion. And there are some things that I was just in the heat of the moment I didn't think about, but I could have used to my advantage, and that is saturators.
It's a total fabrication.
If your goal is to hit loud, think about saturation, soft clipping, distortion. You need to use that to your advantage. But the other thing that we're noticing here is paying attention to your transients. And if you want them to be set up in a way that you can hit and clip and get that loudness, that's something you need to be more critical of. You know, when we're dealing with this, we don't get to talk to the artists. We don't get to, work on revisions. It is exactly as it is when we send it out, and we have no idea what the artist's expectations or goals are with their release. We're just blindly mastering, and that's the whole point of the challenge, is to get us to grow and to work with artists in a really interesting way that hopefully helps them grow too, because a lot of people probably can't afford a top quality mastering engineer, and the tools that we're using right now, our ears and our brains and our creative decisions, applying it to trying to achieve a particular goal, are often out of reach for a lot of people. So this is definitely going to be a lot of fun as we dive into future episodes. If you want to see more stuff like this, definitely go to my Patreon, consider donating or subscribing. For artists, I've set up a $50 a month tier where once a month you can get a mastering session with me or a coaching session with me, and that's included in everything else in that package. So one master per month or one coaching session per month. At $50, I think that's a steal because normally we charge well over that, easily double. You're getting a great value. And not only that, for all of the stuff that we're covering here today, you get access to me one-on-one. And if there are things that are holding you back, you can bet that having that coach or a mentor can give you an outside perspective looking in. We're going to uncover a lot of blind spots, and that's a great way to work. I've already had a lot of great success with Zach Falls. He's seeing a lot of progress, and I've been kudos to this guy for what he's been doing. I've been working with another artist for several months who's about to debut, and that is Lucas Franco. Dude, shout out to you, but I'm also calling you out, buddy. It's time to release. That's right, time to release. So yeah, folks, and my other ask of you guys, what other perks would you guys like to see? Because I want to build a community around us, and the more that I can do for you guys, the more that you let me know what you want, I'll be able to start tailoring my system for that, and I can really help serve you guys even better. This is only the beginning. I have another thing that I want to announce, but I'm kind of waiting, I'm hesitant to announce it just yet, and that is to do with the Mastering Gauntlet. That's right, there's going to be stuff that'll be happening in the off season that I'm trying to put together. So what I would like to just start with is go to the link below, take this 10-15 minute survey, and you'll get an idea of what I'm talking about. If you just do that, that would help me out so much, because I think that would also serve to help you guys out a ton. Because in electronic music, it's becoming clear that everybody wants to learn how to master themselves, and rightfully so. It's such a critical component to the final sound. So it's definitely something worth knowing, right? Anyway, go take that survey. And until next time, guys, happy production.